Just real quick introduction. I've been here several times, and Diane's been here as well. My name is...
If you want to turn it off.
The other one.
Oh, that one's on.
Oh, that one's on.
There we go. Is that working now?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. My name is Andy Everding, and this is my wife, Diana Everding. Like I said, I've been here several times. I am a convert, so I did go through the RCIA program about a little over 15 years ago. We've been married for 15 years. Actually, I was confirmed the Sunday before our wedding that following Saturday, so kind of had a busy 2 weeks right there. But tonight we're going to be talking about marriage. We're going to be talking about the Sacrament of Marriage and what marriage means to the Catholic Church, what it means to Diane and I in our lives. Looking at society right now, so often in society, we as human beings, we look at society to define our roles and our responsibility and even our morality. And all society is a consensus of a group of people. So here's just a couple of facts that I looked up. In the Middle Ages, marriages were used to create bonds and contracts, to unite kingdoms for purposes of treaties, to bring kingdoms together because it was permanent. And so, if Diana and I was to get married, I was the prince of one kingdom, she was the princess of another kingdom. Our child would automatically have a relationship with these two kingdoms in order to build the kingdoms and to share in wealth and treaties. We see that at some point in American history that marriages were used to gain citizenship. People would come to America, they would find somebody, hey, will you marry me so I can get my citizenship? In the late 1700s and early 1800s of American history, polygamy was not illegal. So people were having multiple marriages. In 1970, California passed the first no-fault divorce laws saying that marriage could be dissolved just because I don't like you. And over the next 40 years, the divorce rate in the United States rose to around 50%. And today, that's currently where we sit in the divorce rate of 50%. A lot of people in our society believe that, you date, you get married, you find out you don't like each other, you get divorced, you get married again. I took a little poll where I work, and I have 12 people on my team, 5 of which are not married, and a total of 19 marriages. 19 marriages. And only 2 of us are on our first marriage, and I've been married 15 years and he's been married 25 years. So it's just something that we see in American society that marriage is not eternal and it doesn't last forever. And that's what our society says. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriages are legal in the United States. So the reason I bring this up is because you see that society constantly is changing its perspective on marriage. The Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 years, and for 2,000 years, our requirements for marriage have been the exact same as they are today as they were back then. So just a little bit of the history and the scriptures that support marriage. We as Catholics believe that marriage comes as a gift from the hand of God, that the Catholic vision of marriage is rooted in sacred scripture and is expressed in the teachings and the practices of the church. It has these main elements. Marriage unites a couple in faithful and mature love. Marriage opens a couple to give life. Marriage is a way to respond to God's call to holiness. Marriage calls a couple to be a sign of Christ's love to the world. Because marriage is placed within the saving mercy of Jesus Christ, Catholics recognize it as a sacrament. It is a means through which a husband and a wife grow in love for one another, for their children, and become holy and obtain eternal life. So in the history, in the scriptures, the institution of marriage was created with Adam and Eve. In the creation story, God takes a rib from Adam because he has decided that he needs a helpmate and creates Eve. And God said, a man says, this is the bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, for she has been taken out of man. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and unites with his wife, and they become one flesh. And that's Genesis 2:22 and 24. So we see that God institutes this, and he says in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, that the two shall become one flesh. You can't destroy one flesh. One flesh is one. And then in Matthew, we see that Christ elevates marriage to a sacrament. And he actually goes back and he quotes this exact scripture and says that, the two shall become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, whatever God has joined, let no one separate. Even in the New Testament, in the writings of Paul, he tells us how we are expected to live as a married couple. Wives, submit yourself to your husband as to the Lord. For a husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husband in everything. Husbands, love your wife, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her and washing her with water through the words. And that's in Ephesians chapter 5. And what's really, a lot of husbands love to quote this scripture because it says, wives, submit to your husbands. And in our marriage, I've joked many a times telling Diana that she's supposed to submit to me because that's what the scriptures say. And she responds very quickly, and she says, but you are supposed to love me as Christ loved the church. And if I recall, he sacrificed himself for the church. So it's all like, okay. So, and there you see this relationship, that Paul is referring to. The relationship between a husband and wife is that of Christ and the church. Christ would never do anything to harm the church. Christ would never abandon the church. Christ sacrificed his life for the church. And this is what we as men are called to do, is to sacrifice our life for our wives, to be that salvation, to help cleanse them. And in the same, your wife in return gives life back to you and grows you. I know with me and Diane, so much of our marriage is based on mutual respect. I am not the man I am today because I did it by myself. I'm not even the man I am today because I did it me and God. I'm the man I am today because I allowed my wife to love me with the grace of God and to inspire me. And she has given me so much. I mean, like I said, she's the primary reason that I became interested in the Catholic Church, and that I've grown my faith to the point where it is today. I mean, I would have never imagined myself standing before a group of people coming into the Catholic Church because I grew up Southern Baptist. But we spend so much of our time together discussing traditions of the church, discussing writings of different church fathers to develop each other, because that is the marriage that Christ calls us to have. If she's not helping me strengthen my relationship with Christ, and I'm not helping her strengthen her relationship with Christ, then we're not living the sacramental marriage. Okay, so now to more just facts and details. In the Catholic Church, there are forms of ways to celebrate the sacrament of marriage. There are three forms. The first one is between two baptized Catholics. If you are two baptized Catholics coming into the church to be married, you're going to want to have a Mass at your wedding. And the reason that you have a Mass at your wedding is because you're celebrating the sacrament of marriage, and the first act that you do in your marriage is to receive the body and blood of Christ. So it's taking that whole, you're receiving grace in the sacrament of marriage, and then you turn around and you receive grace again in the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. The second option is if it's two baptized Christians, one being Catholic and one being of a different denomination. Now, with that one, everything about the ceremony is exactly the same except for the Mass is removed. And once again, the reason the Mass is removed is because if you have two Christians, one Catholic, one not, and it's time for communion, one of your spouses is not going to go up and receive communion. And you're entering into a new life together, and so the church is all like, let's remove the Mass so that it's not showing in any way, shape, or form in the first act of your marriage a separation. And then the third form is between a baptized Catholic and a non-baptized individual. Now with that one, first of all, you have to have the bishop's approval in order to have that marriage. And because the sacrament of marriage, the actual sacrament, is between two baptized Christians, a marriage in the Catholic Church between a baptized Catholic and a non-baptized person is not a sacrament. It is a celebration, and it is a civil union, but until both members are baptized, it is not elevated to the level of a sacrament. So in the actual marriage ceremony, like with all sacraments, you guys have talked about sacraments, and that every sacrament has form and matter. Form is the words that you say in the sacrament that give it power. And the matter is the physical, tangible object or materialistic thing that participates in the sacrament. For example, in baptism, the water would be the matter, and the form would be, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, marriage being a sacrament has the same thing. The matter is the ring, and the form is the vows. So a lot of times, I know I've been to weddings, Protestant weddings, where the bride and groom have written their own vows. This is something that's not done in the Catholic Church, because what you say is as important as what you do, because it is a sacrament. So there's traditionally two versions that are offered. One is where the bride or groom speaks the words, and the other one is where the priest speaks the words, and the bride or groom responds with, I do, I do, I do. So the first thing that is done is the priest says, ask 3 questions. And these 3 questions are important because here in just a second, Diana's going to talk about the requirements of getting married in the Catholic Church. You see that when she goes through that, these first questions that the priest does, you see where it plays the importance. So the priest will ask, I'm just going to use me and Diane as the names. Diane and Andy, have you come here freely and without reservation to give yourself to each other in marriage? Will you love and honor each other as man and wife for the rest of your life? Will you accept children lovingly from God and bring them up in accordance with the law of Christ and His church? And then each the bride and the groom would respond with I do, individually. Then we go on to the actual vows. Now, what's really awesome about the sacrament of marriage, because in every sacrament there is a minister of the sacrament. In baptism, for example, the traditional minister is the priest. The priest is the one who baptizes. Although any baptized person or even non-baptized person, as long as they do the proper form, can do an actual baptism, the ordinary minister is the priest, the bishop, or the deacon. In the Eucharist, the minister is the bishop or the priest. Well, in the marriage ceremony, the priest is the witness. The minister of the sacrament, the one who is giving grace through that sacrament, is the husband and the wife. The husband is invoking the power of God to give his wife grace in the sacrament, and then she in return is invoking the power of God to give him grace in the sacrament. So that's something that a lot of people don't know and don't realize, is that because marriage is so important to the church, and because it is a sacrament, that you, in making this decision and deciding to get married, that you're actually being the minister in this sacrament, and that you are giving your grace, giving God's grace to your spouse. So then you go on to the actual formal vows, where the priest says, or the one I have is where the bride and groom say. So I would say, I, Andy, take Diane to be my wife. I promise to be true to you in good times and bad times, in sickness and in health, and I will love and honor you all the days of my life. And then you move on to the ring ceremony, and this is another thing that I really like about the marriage ceremony is that because everything that we do in our faith revolves around the power of God and it revolves around the Trinity, when you slip the ring on your spouse's finger, you say, Diane, take this ring as a sign of my love and fidelity in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So you, as the minister of the sacrament, are blessing the marriage as well as the symbol that you're using in the sacrament to hold it together.
You done?
Yep. Just don't move my pages.
Okay. Okay, the requirements of getting married in the Catholic Church. Obviously, because marriage is a sacrament, because it is permanent, and because there are very specific requirements and very specific things that you do, or specific job requirements, I guess is a good way to put it. We do have requirements in order to get married to ensure that everyone is free and in agreement with what's going on. So you cannot kidnap a person and drag them to the altar and marry them and it be binding. That won't work. The first thing is that the spouses are free to marry. That means that there is no other impediment to the marriage. There's no previous marriage that would negate that. There's no legal restrictions either, or moral restrictions such as marrying your brother, not free to marry my brother, those type of things. So both spouses have to be free to marry. Both spouses have to be capable of giving their consent to marry. It's pretty self-explanatory. They freely exchange their consent. That goes to the whole, kidnapping somebody and running to the border to go get married. They have to freely give their consent. They can't be under any duress or pressure to get married from family or, pretty much anything else you can imagine. Family is just the one that comes to mind most frequently. In consenting to marry, they have to intend to marry for life and to be faithful to one another and open to children. That goes to the permanency of it. It is the rest of your life. And especially since young people like to date for just a little bit and get married a little more often than more mature adults, they have to understand exactly what that means, because at 20, the rest of your life is the next 70 years. That's a long time. That's a very long time.
And what's really interesting about talking about the requirements is that, they're not just, requirements. We know several individuals that have petitioned the church for marriage, but because either they didn't meet the requirements, one couple said that they didn't want to have children, that they refused to have children, and they were going to do every means to prevent from having children. Priest very kindly said, then you can't get married in the church. Were they upset? Absolutely. But we can't stand behind what we believe if we don't stand behind what we believe. So it's not one of those, let me just check the boxes and I'm good to go. We really do insist on these requirements as a church, being met. Sorry.
Well, and having people understand, exactly why the requirements are there. Because it's one of those things that, like for instance, in the case of the couple that didn't want to have kids, they didn't understand why that was a big deal. And it comes from the nature of love. If you are unwilling to have children, then you are not freely giving all of yourself to your spouse, and your spouse giving all of themselves to you, because you're holding back that part of yourself and saying, no, I don't want that. So you can't give all of yourself, that includes bodily, to the other person and have them give themselves to you if you say, no, absolutely not. We're going to use whatever means possible to prevent having kids. They have to intend the good of each other. That sounds a little odd, but the rest of your life, your work, is to assist your spouse, support them, pray with them, remind them of their responsibilities when it comes to their faith, to help make them, yourself, and your marriage as a whole holy. That's a very daunting requirement when you really think about it. Is you always have to have the good of the other in mind for the things that you do. Not only the good of their finances or the good of the kids, but the good of their spirit and their soul has to be a priority for you as the other person getting married. And the consent has to be given in the presence of 2 witnesses before a properly authorized church minister. Any exceptions to the last one has to be approved by a church authority. Generally what they do is ensuring that they are capable witnesses. They have your best man and maid of honor be the 2 witnesses, and the authorized church witness is the priest. Usually marriages happen within the church as the proper setting for a sacrament, because it is a sacramental act. There are a few exceptions to that, but the church strongly recommends that it should be in the church, and especially if you're both Catholic, it has to be in the church with the Mass, because it is so important and it is a sacrament. They don't want anyone to lose sight of exactly how important and how significant this act is as a part of that person's faith journey. And the rest of it's for next.
I think you're good. I think I'm just chiming in.
Oh, I have the next one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just here to interrupt you now.
Okay, you're just, oh, awesome. Well then, I get to keep talking. Because of the requirements and because of the gravity of what you're doing in entering into marriage, there's pre-Cana courses that you can take so that you fully understand what it is that you're agreeing to. Because you're stuck for the rest of your life. That's the nature of marriage. So you really want to know what's required before you decide to say I do, because once you say I do, God will hold you to that.
She mentions the word pre-Cana. Just FYI, that comes from the wedding in Cana, which is where Christ did his first miracle, which was around a wedding. And I meant to say this earlier and I forgot, so I'm just going to step in. I hope that's okay. Okay, so in the wedding in the wedding of Cana, she's used to this. I mean, she's been married to me for 15 years. I don't let her talk for too long before I interrupt her. But in the wedding feast at Cana is when Christ first did his first public miracle of turning water to wine. What's interesting about this is, well, first of all, it was last Sunday's gospel reading, so that's always nice. But in the Jewish tradition, a wedding feast would last for an entire week. The groom and the bride were responsible for feeding the community and the wedding party and providing wine. If you were to run out of wine before the wedding feast was over, it was a bad omen on your marriage. So we see that first of all, Christ was not even really ready to start his ministry, but yet he decided to step up early and do his first miracle of turning the water to wine, which shows us that he's like, okay, I cannot let this marriage have a bad omen on it because they ran out of wine. So not only am I going to turn it into wine, I'm going to make it the best wine anybody's ever had. And so we see that he took this opportunity in his first miracle to, in a very subtle way, put this emphasis on marriage that we draw from as Catholics, of the importance of marriage, not only to the spouses, not only to the church, but to Christ himself.
One of the other things that, well, first of all, in the pre-Cana courses, they're going to go over a lot of the important aspects, such as marriage is a vocation. I don't know, have you guys talked about the priesthood or anything like that? No? Okay, good. Well, you have choices for vocation. Your vocation is not something really that you choose. It is something that God calls you to. Your vocation can be to the consecrated life, which or priesthood, being I think it's consecrated single is how they do, is a nun, things like that. You can also be called to be single for your entire life as a vocation. And you can be called to the vocation of marriage. All of the vocations, that means everyone. By definition means everyone. All of vocations and everyone is called to chastity. Chastity most people don't understand how chastity works in marriage. Chastity goes to the exclusivity of that the conjugal acts are strictly limited to your spouse in every way. That's why the church takes such a stand on things like pornography and how it degrades marriage. That's the only example that comes to mind right now, even though I know there are more. But that chastity is lived out with that exclusivity with each other. If you know somebody who's been married for a very long time and they have a really good marriage and they're walking down the street, you can ask them, well, did you see that really attractive person over there? And they're going to go, what? Well, I guess they're cute, and walk on. Because after a while, it becomes habit. When you create that...
More of a virtue.
It becomes habit too. It is a virtue, but it is a habitual virtue. It's habit. But you get to the point where that exclusivity becomes almost second nature. And that's where that virtue of chastity comes in. Of course, chastity takes is different for people who remain single. They're still called to chastity, but they're called to abstinence. Same with the priesthood and nuns and that whole group. So chastity is something that is very different within a marriage, and that's for a very specific reason. because when God created man and woman, He created us equal and different. When He created woman, He created a helpmate for Adam. We were not designed to be the same, but we were designed to be complementary. Especially with defining gender roles in society. This becomes a little bit more confusing when you're coming to be married, because gender roles in society tend to favor one gender over another, or they tend to emphasize this gender's work as more beneficial to society than this gender's work. And the more you come to equality in society, the more everybody is treated alike and has the same expectations of being able to do everything, which is not possible. If you're going to try and run a household and run a family without division of roles, you're going to be a very tired person. It's an enormous amount of responsibility and work. And because of that, God designed our roles to be equal but complementary.
Well, it's like with the gender roles, society says that a man or a woman can do anything, but can a man be a mother? Can a woman be a father? This is the natural order that God has designed, that the two come together, and as wonderful as my wife is with the children, she can never be their father. She can never treat them the way a father treats them, and never have that type of relationship and build that type of character that you only learn from your father. The same way, I can never be a mother. I can never teach my children the way my wife can from being a mother. Does that mean that she's a better parent than me, or I'm a better parent than her? Absolutely not. It means that God has designed us to have our own unique role that is equal but different. So even though we see that society says, yes, men and women are equal, men and women are the same, they're not the same, they're equal. But they're both precious in their differences more so than their sameness.
Sameness, I like that word. Marriage and family was also designed to give us a physical representation and understanding of the love of the Trinity. God's love was so abundant within the Trinity that he overflowed with it and literally poured it out on us. Your marriage is supposed to be the same way. That giving and receiving of love selflessly between spouses is supposed to give rise to children. It is the way that you participate with your love with each other and God to create new life. So you get a very physical representation of the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son in your family with the husband, the wife, and your children. Made me lose my train with sameness. With the requirements, and in the pre-Cana courses, they're going to expand on the different marriages as far as from religious backgrounds. If it's two Catholic persons getting married, they're going to go over a lot of the basic stuff and really expand on that, as far as communication, sharing ideas. Marriage is something that you continually work on throughout your lifetime. You're building up each other, even when it's difficult. And they go through some of the topics that, standard things that most marriages run into, things like that. It gets a little deeper when you're talking about what the church calls mixed marriages. When you have a Catholic and another baptized Christian getting married, at that point, you have to address the issue of the faith, tradition, and education of the children. Because just having kids, you still got to raise them and educate them, especially in the faith traditions. That becomes a very big talking point, especially when you have those that are entering into a mixed marriage in your pre-Cana group. It becomes very in-depth because a lot of couples haven't really decided, as far as the children are concerned, okay, what are we going to do with the education of the children? They're just so happy with each other to get married. I hadn't really thought that through. So that brings up a lot of those things that need to be addressed. Now, for a Catholic person, your responsibility is to do everything that you can do to educate your children in the Catholic faith. Your spouse is told and has an understanding that your requirement is to do everything that you can do and that you are going to do that. So your spouse is aware and does know that you are planning on educating and raising your children Catholic. I don't think they have them sign anything anymore, but they used to.
Yeah, they used to. I know when Diana and I got married that, I was coming from another faith tradition prior to conversion. That was one of the reasons that I decided to convert was in our pre-Cana courses it was discussed that I would have to make a commitment as a Baptist to allow my children to be raised in the Catholic faith, because it was part of the requirements of marriage in the church is that you are going to instill the faith and the teachings of the church in your children. But now it's the way it's worded is a little bit more, it puts the responsibility of teaching the Catholic faith on the Catholic participant in the marriage, that they will do everything possible to ensure that, because you can't make your husband do what he doesn't want to do.
With the third type, when you're talking about a Catholic marrying a non-baptized person or a person from a non-Christian faith tradition, it is not a sacrament, but it is a union. And as a Catholic person, you're still required to do all that you can do to bring up your children in the Catholic faith tradition. It becomes a little bit more in-depth then, and they start talking about some of the other issues that are going to, at some time, arise within the marriage as far as the different faith traditions. And there is a significantly more strain on those marriages because of the different religions. So the church wants to ensure that you guys have discussed it, that you do understand where both of you are coming from, you understand what your responsibilities are, and that these things will come up, and you may need help confronting them, because that's one of the biggest things that all human beings fight over is, this is what I believe and what I think, and what you believe and you think. So it will come up.
With the pre-Cana courses, the church generally requires that you start pre-Cana courses a year prior to the marriage date. And what I found very useful when we went through pre-Cana courses is, you're madly in love and you're like, I want to marry you, I want to have a family with you, and it's all going to be roses and wonderful. And then you go and meet with the priest and discuss it. Then you start your pre-Cana courses, which a portion of them are with a priest and a portion portion of them are with generally with a mature Catholic couple, and then suddenly they're all like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Especially when you're sitting there talking to somebody who's been married for 25 years and they're like, oh, you're going to hate him. There are going to be days that you're going to get up and you can't stand him. You're like, oh, no, not him. I love him. Oh, yeah, just wait. And then you start kind of poking a little bit and you start bringing up those issues, and you see these couples, these fiancés that are all like madly in love with each other, starting cutting their eyes at each other going, do what? I didn't know that's what you thought about that. And so it brings you that when you actually enter into the sacrament of marriage in a Catholic marriage, you've already got a little bit of understanding that it's not going to be this most wonderful, beautiful thing every day of the week. It's not going to be this fairy tale, because we just spent a year, half the time fighting in these classes because we started to realize that, yes, we are different individuals. Yes, we grew up in different households. We have different ideas on how to raise the children, different ideas on how to invest money, different ideas on what car manufacturer makes the best cars. And you're working through these things so that when you're actually married and that honeymoon phase starts to wear off a little bit and you come to a conflict, you're all like, okay, we've already discussed this. We discussed this in pre-Cana courses, and you said that you were going to address it this way, and you start to develop a healthy fighting relationship. I mean, because everybody knows, every couple knows that there's fighting. But is your fighting effective? Is it helpful? Does it grow the marriage? Does it grow your faith? And does it strengthen that relationship and that bond? And because I've seen a lot of people of different denominations or of no religious affiliation just be all like, well, he changed after the first year of marriage. And it's all like, sweetheart, everybody changes after the first year of marriage. But the pre-Cana courses and sitting there and doing this, you're getting this ahead of time. You're getting this idea that it's not, because you're talking to mature Catholic couples that are going to tell you and not lie to you, because they want to encourage your faith and your relationship and to see your marriage blossom and bloom. And so they're going to tell you all the little nasty things about marriages that all your friends aren't telling you, so you're prepared for it.
I can't say the word. The permanency of marriage. In order for anything to be stable, you really do need that permanent foundation. You need that knowledge that the idea of divorce or separation or any of those things is completely off the table. Now, how do we deal with this problem? Because you're going to be married, so either find a way to work through it or find a way to work through it, because you've taken away all the other options. It does a couple of things. First of all, it gives both parties the security that they need to really give all of themselves to their spouse. Because this person, they promised before God, no matter how hard it gets, we're going to find a way to work through this. And they are there to help support me, and I'm there to help support them. And to be perfectly honest, that level of commitment allows you to grow your faith so much better as well. Because with that level of commitment, you end up having a better understanding of how God is able to forgive and love all these things for you and not leave you. And that is what it is supposed to show the entire world, is if we can have two people who come together in a sacramental marriage and they can stay together no matter what and work it out no matter what. It's because God can make things work no matter what. The other thing is, with permanence, when you have a sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church, sacraments give grace. Marriage is one of those sacraments that never stops giving grace. It's not just grace on that day. Marriage is a permanent sacrament that gives you grace by living your married life. And you need that grace because every person grows and changes throughout their lifetime, and they grow and change at different rates. So you may be growing in your faith faster than your spouse is growing in their faith, and that causes tension. That's what that grace is for. It is to help you continue to be loving to this person who's driving you insane. It's to continue to be loving to his family because he loves his family, and you really want to support him in loving his family, and you need that grace to make that happen. So that's that's one of the miraculous things about the grace in marriage is how, when you sit down and really look at it, you know every single day that God is giving you this grace, this ability to confront these problems that are insurmountable without it. I would not hang out with his family if I wasn't married to him. I'm not sure I'd be in the same city as his family if I weren't married to him. I love them because he does, and I respect them immensely. I just want to live with them. But so that permanency creates that atmosphere where you can really deepen your relationships because it is secure.
You're able to completely trust. I mean, I've had several friends in my life who are on their second or third marriage, and talking to them, there's always this period where they can't give themselves completely to their second spouse or their third spouse because their first spouse hurt them in ways that are unimaginable. Well, you know, we as Catholics, I know that no matter what I do, no matter how much I open myself up to my wife, that she sees every part of me, I know that not only is she going to love the ugly parts of me, but she's not going to run from the ugly parts of me because there is grace in our marriage, and because of her love of her faith, and because of the requirements of the church, that she's like, we need to work through this, not I'm done with you. You know, and so that gives you that true freedom to just open up yourself. I mean, if you've ever been hurt by anybody, you know, your parents or anybody that you just felt like, okay, you say you love me, but I don't, you know, I do something wrong and then suddenly you don't love me anymore. You know, having that and having the ability to completely connect with your spouse and your wife, knowing that there's no way that this marriage is going to end, is so rewarding because you know, I had a lot of trauma as a child, and so I was very distrusting of people, you know, even when I met Diane. But, you know, she kept saying to me over and over again, there's nothing that you can do to get rid of me. She said, we're committed. And so over the years, I was able to completely open myself up to her. And then when I got to that point, just the pure joy that I feel and knowing that there may only be one person in this world who knows me completely and loves me completely. You know, one human being standing beside me that knows everything about me and loves me in spite of it. And there's no more secrets. There's no more, you know, hey, I can come home and say, so this is what I did, and she's all like, oh my gosh, we're done. You know, I don't love you anymore. You know, it's that freedom that is truly there. And I know it's hard to believe in because a lot of guys are like me, and you just hold back because, you know, I've got a good thing going on with her. She's a great woman, but if she ever found out this, she wouldn't like me so much. You know, because of the permanency of marriage, because of that vow of forever or until death do us part, you know that, yeah, it may take her 6 to 8 months to get over it, But at least she's there for that 6 to 8 months, giving you those dirty looks because she's not going anywhere.
Thank you. Every time he will deserve it. You guys made me lose my train. What'd you do? Boy, you got all kinds of stuff on there. There is also the process of annulments in the Catholic Church. The process of annulments is not a divorce. It's not saying that the relationship never happened. What it is saying is that the requirements that we talked about, that you were free to marry, that you're freely giving your consent, that you're open to children, that you're exclusive to one another, that it was performed in front of the witnesses in the church. Something about those requirements was not met. That somewhere in there, something was not as it should have been when you got married. And therefore, the sacrament was not present. That becomes really important. No matter how much I wanted to get rid of my husband, I can never have an annulment. It doesn't matter what I did. It doesn't matter what he tries to do. And he will never be granted an annulment. Because before we were married, we ensured that all of those requirements were met and understood, and that we performed that sacrament for each other properly. So that's one of the things about annulments. Now, annulments are not easy to get, and that's for a very specific purpose. It's because they are to be an exception. You go through the tribunal. First thing you got to do is you have to fill out the stack of paperwork that goes through before the marriage, what was going on, what was the situation, when you were married, what was going on, what was the situation, after the marriage, what happened, what was the breakdown, what was the fall apart, why did you feel like you could not remain in this marriage. You have to have witnesses that knew you before, during, and after your marriage. And they have to fill out this paperwork of what they thought of your faith life and what you did in the marriage and how you screwed up, how your spouse screwed up, what his faith life was like. A dizzying amount of paperwork. And it's very, very in-depth and very invasive because they want to ensure that they have covered everything to see if the requirements are met. Even when you're granted an annulment, that does not necessarily mean you can remarry, because they can put requirements on your annulment that one or both parties cannot marry again. Not sure when they do that. Never seen it happen, but that is something that they do.
Now, the biggest thing with an annulment, as Catholics, you can get a civil divorce if need be, if there's a situation of violence or infidelity. The main thing is because of the permanency of a Catholic marriage is you can get a civil divorce and that's fine, but you cannot get remarried, because as soon as you get remarried, you are now committing adultery, you are living a life of adultery, and that is a mortal sin. So a civil separation or divorce for the means of the safety of the children. I mean, because if your spouse starts drinking and becomes an alcoholic, starts hitting the children, and this is your only solution to protect your children, and you need to get a civil divorce so that you can get a restraining order and dissolve their rights to the children to protect the children, the church is not going to condemn you on that. If the marriage was valid at the beginning, can you get an annulment? No. But you can get a civil divorce to protect the children, and as long as you maintain a life of chastity and abstinence after that point, then the church allows you to participate fully in all the sacraments. So that's just a little side note. Annulments are primarily for the desire to be remarried, and the tribunal very often says no, because they're tasked with the responsibility of figuring out if this marriage, at the moment of the marriage, if the sacrament was present, if all the requirements were met, then, regardless of what's happening now, it's a valid marriage. Once married, always married. I mean, it's the same thing as Diana was talking about the vocations earlier. Same thing as a priest. Can a priest stop being a priest and stop actually performing as a priest? Absolutely. But he was ordained a priest, and that is his vocation. So once a priest, always a priest. He may not be practicing in a parish, he may not be serving in a church, but he is still held by God's standards and God's requirements of a priest, because once a priest, always a priest. Once married, always married. It's permanent. And with the annulment, it's just basically saying that, was it a valid marriage at the beginning? Was all the components there to say that this is a sacrament and God blessed it as a sacrament? Because if He did, regardless of what has happened in the years after that time, we can't undo a sacrament. The tribunal cannot undo a sacrament. All they can do is say, by research and study and witness statements and researching some more, say, okay, we conclude that the sacrament was never valid. It was never actually a sacramental marriage. So, I mean, it's very difficult. But there are cases in which annulments are granted. But it's just something to be aware of. There's also another type of annulment. It's actually called a Pauline, and that's when it's two non-baptized individuals coming into the church, and one or both have been previously married, because in order for it to be a sacrament, the requirement is that it is two baptized Christians. So, you still have to get statements. You have to get statements from your ex-spouse saying that they were not baptized at the time of the marriage, or since the marriage has been ended. Because just because you got a civil divorce does not mean that God has ended the marriage. So if you get baptized after the divorce, then you have to get an annulment. So as long as both parties from the previous marriage are not baptized at the point of filing the paperwork and the paperwork getting approved, can you have that one? Do you have a question?
No, thanks.
Oh, okay. I was reading your mind.
However, if you are a Catholic and you are marrying a baptized Christian who has been married prior, they do have to receive an annulment in order to be married. Because just because they came from, a Protestant church, the church assumes that if it's two baptized persons, then the sacrament was there.
What if they're already on their second marriage and they've been married forever? Why, and they're joining the Catholic Church, why would they have to go back and get an annulment going back? Is there like a...
Because there's not a statute of limitations on marriage. You're still assumed to be married to your first wife, and therefore not married to your second wife or husband. And
because
if you were only married for like a couple months,
Well, marriage is
Well, then-
permanent.
Yeah.
So the first marriage is permanent, and it is the marriage that God first sees. And so until that is dissolved through the annulment process, you are still in that if you're baptized Christians and you're not working towards the Paul line.
As far as exactly what would be required as far as annulments, when you're talking about history and people coming into the church, best thing to do is honestly talk to a priest about it. He'll direct you to the appropriate person to discuss that with, because there are several different requirements and avenues that you can go about doing that. Like Andy was saying, you know, some of them, like the Pauline, it's not that long duration wise, or not nearly as long as an annulment. For an annulment, they also have to notify the other party. And the other party has to give them some indication of whether or not they want to participate in this.
What if they don't participate?
Then they sign a paper saying that they don't want to participate and mail it back to the tribunal.
What if they don't sign it at all?
There is a way that you can go on, but certain requirements have to be met.
There's a lady at the diocese office that's what she works with, the annulment process, and you know, she can answer questions way better than we can. But she has a lot of information. I mean, I've gone and talked to her several times with friends and acquaintances that were looking at the annulment process. Very knowledgeable.